Minutes after my divorce was finalized, I called my dad and told him to fire all 19 employees my in-laws had planted in our company. Thank God I did, because that same evening my former mother-in-law kicked in my door, demanding alimony and threatening to bankrupt us by Friday. What she did not know was that her arrogant threat would trigger a digital lockdown that would leave her entire family begging for mercy. My name is Monica, and I am 33 years old. I spent the last few years as the vice president of operations at my father's mid-sized logistics firm in Chicago, bleeding myself dry for a husband and mother-in-law who only saw me as an open checkbook. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic relatives who underestimated your worth. The morning after my former mother-in-law Patricia stormed out of my condo threatening to bankrupt my father's company, the Chicago sun reflected harshly off the glass facade of Richard Logistics. I pulled my car into the executive parking structure, my mind completely focused on the day ahead. I knew her arrogant threats were rarely empty, but what I did not expect was to see a line of our commercial delivery trucks backed up entirely down the block. Their engines were idling loudly in the crisp morning air, and the loading dock was completely at a standstill. I stepped out of my car and walked briskly toward the main entrance. Through the massive glass walls of the lobby, I could see a full-blown riot unfolding. The 19 people I had fired yesterday were not packing up their homes or looking for new jobs. They were staging a highly coordinated and disruptive protest right in the middle of our corporate reception area. They had physically barricaded the secure turnstiles, preventing our actual hardworking employees from getting to their desks. The noise was deafening. My former sister-in-law, Amanda, was holding a smartphone actively live-streaming the entire spectacle to her social media followers. She was screaming into the camera about a hostile, toxic work environment and demanding that local news stations come down to expose the cruel termination of dedicated family men and women. Several of Patricia's nephews, guys who routinely slept in their cubicles and took 4-hour lunch breaks, were shouting at our security guards demanding their premium health insurance be reinstated immediately. It was a circus designed to paralyze my business and humiliate me into submission. Before I could even address the head of security, the glass doors slid open behind me, and Jason marched into the lobby. He wore a custom-tailored Italian suit purchased with my father's corporate credit card. He immediately raised his hands, silencing his unruly relatives, and stepped into the center of the room like a wounded hero arriving to save the day. He looked directly at the crowd of actual employees who were waiting nervously by the elevators. He shook his head slowly, projecting a masterclass performance of fake sympathy and deep sorrow. "I am so sorry you all have to witness this," Jason announced, projecting his voice so it echoed across the marble floor. "My ex-wife is having a severe mental breakdown over our divorce. She is emotionally unstable and taking her personal heartbreak out on innocent people. These 19 individuals dedicated their lives to this company. I sacrificed my youth building this logistics grid for her father, and this is how she repays family, with hysterical, irrational revenge." The sheer audacity of his gaslighting made my blood run cold. He was banking on the old societal trope of the crazy, bitter ex-wife. He wanted my staff to lose faith in my leadership. He wanted to publicly shame me into backing down, just as his mother had tried to do in my kitchen the night before. Jason turned his attention to the head of security, a towering man named David, who had worked for my father for a decade. "Stand aside," David, Jason ordered with arrogant authority. "I need to go up to my corner office to retrieve my personal belongings and pull some files from the main server. I am not letting Monica's emotional instability disrupt our client shipments." I stepped forward, the sharp click of my heels cutting through the lingering murmurs in the lobby. My voice was calm, completely steady, and devoid of the hysteria Jason was so desperately trying to project. "You are not going anywhere near the executive floor, Jason," I stated clearly. "David, hand him his box." David reached behind the reception desk and hoisted a single small cardboard box onto the counter. It contained a few framed photographs, a personalized coffee mug, and a handful of golf magazines. The totality of Jason's contributions to our corporate headquarters. Jason stared at the pathetic little box, his charming facade instantly evaporating. The veins in his neck bulged as his face twisted into a sneer of genuine rage. He took a step toward me, jabbing his finger in the air. "You think you can just pack up my life in a cardboard box?" he demanded, dropping the wounded hero act entirely. "You are making a massive mistake, Monica. I still know the master passwords. I built the routing architecture for this entire regional grid. If you do not reinstate my family right this second, I will pull out my phone and shut down the entire Midwest logistics network. You will lose every single delivery contract by noon." A few of the actual employees gasped, whispering nervously among themselves. A complete grid shutdown would be catastrophic for our retail partners. Jason smirked clearly, believing he had backed me into a corner. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out his company-issued smartphone ready to execute his threat. I did not flinch. I just smiled, a cold, practiced expression that mirrored the one his mother had given me the night before. "Go ahead, Jason," I challenged him. "Open the network app." He glared at me confidently, tapping the screen of his phone, but his smirk vanished the second the screen illuminated. He tapped it again, pressing the screen harder. He swiped frantically, his breath catching in his throat. "You did not build our routing architecture, Jason," I informed him, my voice projecting across the dead silent lobby. "You took credit for the work of our junior developers while you were out playing golf, and while you were sitting in the courthouse yesterday morning eagerly signing our final divorce decree so you could run off with your new girlfriend." I was on the phone with our IT department. I took a step closer, ensuring every word landed with devastating impact. I had them lock down all administrative access. I had them rewrite every single server code. And I had them execute a remote factory wipe on all 19 of the company phones and laptops assigned to your family. You are locked out. You have zero access. You have zero leverage. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The phone in his hand was nothing more than an expensive piece of useless metal. The 19 in-laws standing behind him suddenly went completely silent. The aggressive chanting stopped. Amanda lowered her phone, ending her live stream in a panic as she realized her own device had been wiped of all its data. I turned my attention back to David and the rest of the security team. If any of these non-employees are still standing in this lobby in exactly 60 seconds, call the Chicago police and press charges for criminal trespassing. The resulting scramble was pathetic. The brave, disruptive protesters suddenly turned into frightened trespassers. They pushed past each other, rushing through the glass doors and out into the brisk morning air. Jason stood frozen for a moment, his chest heaving with impotent fury. He snatched his small cardboard box off the reception desk, shot me a look of pure hatred, and stormed out without saying another word. The lobby erupted into quiet applause from my actual staff. I took a deep breath, instructing the dispatch managers to get the delivery trucks moving again. For a brief, fleeting second, I felt a profound sense of triumph. I had successfully severed the parasitic cord that had been draining my father's legacy. I had protected the business. I walked into the elevator and rode up to the executive suite, ready to finally sit at my desk and begin the hard work of rebuilding our operations. I pushed open the heavy oak doors to my office, craving a single moment of quiet reflection. But the peace was instantly shattered. Kevin, my lead forensic accountant, burst through my office doors behind me. He completely bypassed his usual professional knock. He looked physically ill. His face was chalk white, his tie was loosened, and a sheen of cold sweat coated his forehead. He was breathing heavily as if he had just sprinted up all 6 flights of stairs. He carried a massive, heavily bound financial ledger and dropped it onto my mahogany desk with a loud, resounding thud. The heavy book slid across the polished wood, stopping right in front of my keyboard. "Monica, you have to look at this right now," Kevin urged, his voice trembling with genuine panic. He flipped the ledger open, pointing a shaking finger at a long series of brightly highlighted vendor transactions. I thought we just had a bloated payroll problem. I thought they were just lazy. But I dug deeper into the accounts payable overnight. I stared down at the highlighted rows of numbers, my stomach plummeting as the reality of the math began to form a terrifying picture. "Monica, listen to me carefully," Kevin said, looking me dead in the eye. Those 19 employees were not just collecting unearned paychecks. Look at these outbound vendor payouts. They have been processing payments for shipping containers that do not exist. They have been funneling millions of dollars into a blind limited liability company for the past 2 years. I stared at the ledger Kevin shoved in front of me. The numbers printed on the crisp white pages blurred for a fraction of a second before my mind snapped them into a terrifying crystal-clear pattern. Rows upon rows of vendor payouts were perfectly aligned, all bearing the same authorization signatures. Jason and his uncle. "Show me the invoices," I demanded, my voice eerily calmly. Kevin quickly pulled a stack of printed documents from his briefcase and spread them across my mahogany desk. He pointed a trembling finger at the top sheet. "These are billing statements for overseas shipping containers. According to our logistics grid, we leased 40 of them last month to transport retail goods from the coastal ports to our Midwest distribution hubs." I scrutinized the paperwork. The vendor listed was a company called Apex Holdings Group. I had never heard of them in my 10 years of managing the operations floor. Cross-reference these container identification numbers with the actual Port Authority logs I instructed. "I already did," Kevin replied, swallowing hard. "Monica, the containers do not exist. The tracking numbers are entirely fabricated. They used sequential numeric codes that mimic our legitimate vendors, but when you run them through the National Freight Registry, they come back blank. Your in-laws have been generating phantom freight orders, approving the invoices themselves, and wiring company funds directly to this Apex Holdings Group." My jaw tightened. How much exactly? "Over the last 24 months, just shy of $4 million. The sheer scale of the theft was breathtaking. Patricia and Jason had not just been enjoying lazy, overpaid jobs. They had been actively looting my father's legacy, draining the lifeblood of the business to line their own pockets. "Find out who owns Apex Holdings Group," I commanded. "Dig through the state registry of limited liability companies. Trace the routing numbers on the wire transfers. I want to know exactly whose bank account this money is sitting in." Kevin nodded frantically and rushed out of my office, clutching his laptop to his chest. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the warehouse loading dock. The delivery trucks were finally moving again, the morning protest having dissolved into a pathetic retreat. But the victory felt entirely hollow now. My family had been robbed blind by the people I had invited into my home. The heavy oak doors of my office creaked open. I turned to see my father Richard standing in the doorway. He looked as though he had aged 10 years in the past 10 minutes. His usually perfect posture was slumped and his face was drawn and gray. He walked slowly toward the leather guest chairs opposite my desk and sank into one, burying his face in his hands. "Dad." I started stepping away from the window. "I need to show you something Kevin just found." "Patricia just called me." My father interrupted, his voice muffled and thick with exhaustion. He dropped his hands and looked up at me with haunted eyes. "She is demanding a $5 million settlement." I scoffed, walking back to my desk. "For what? Wrongful termination of employees who are actively stealing from us. Let her try. We have absolute proof of gross misconduct." "You do not understand, Monica," my father said, leaning forward and resting his elbows on his knees. "She is not just threatening a civil lawsuit. She told me that if I do not wire the $5 million to her private account by Friday, she is going to release doctored compliance documents to the Department of Transportation." My blood ran cold. The Department of Transportation was the lifeblood of our operation. A single major compliance violation could ground our fleet. "What kind of documents?" I asked softly. "Safety logs, driver hour limits, and vehicle maintenance records." My father explained, his voice shaking. "Jason was handling our DOT compliance reporting for the last 2 years. He intentionally filed the paperwork with critical catastrophic errors. Patricia said they have hard copies proving we violated federal transport laws. If she hands those over to the regulators, they will strip our operating licenses immediately. The company will be shut down by the weekend. We will lose everything." The devious brilliance of their plan clicked into place. Jason had intentionally sabotaged our legal compliance to create a dead man's switch. They knew they would eventually be caught, or that I would eventually tire of their laziness and fire them. When that day came, they had an extortion plot ready to execute. "I am so sorry, Monica," my father whispered, tears welling in his tired eyes. "I let them in. I let Patricia convince me that having Jason's family around would help your marriage. She told me you were too focused on work, that you were neglecting him, and that giving his family prominent roles in the company would bring you two closer together. I felt so guilty. I just wanted you to be happy. I should have listened to you when you said they were useless." I walked around the desk and placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You were manipulated, Dad. Patricia is a master at making people doubt their own reality." "We have to pay her," he said, his voice cracking with defeat. "It is the only way to save the company. We can take out a commercial loan against the warehouse property. It will cripple our profit margins for the next decade, but it will keep the trucks on the road. It will save my legacy. We just have to settle and let them go." I looked down at my father, seeing the broken spirit of a man who had worked his entire life to build something meaningful only to have it held hostage by greedy parasites. He was ready to surrender. He was ready to let Patricia win. I removed my hand from his shoulder and walked over to the modern biometric safe concealed behind a framed painting on my office wall. I pressed my thumb against the scanner. The heavy steel door clicked open. Just then, Kevin rushed back into the office, out of breath. "Monica, I got it," he announced, waving a printed document. "I traced the registered agent for Apex Holdings Group. The LLC is registered in Delaware, but the primary banking routes trace directly to a joint offshore account. The account holders are Patricia and Jason." My father gasped, burying his face in his hands once again. $4 million, he groaned. "They stole $4 million, and now they want $5 million more. I am ruined." I pulled a thick blue legal folder from the safe and closed the steel door. I walked back to my desk, standing tall and resolute. I looked at Kevin and thanked him, instructing him to keep digging into Jason's emails. Once Kevin left and closed the door, I turned my attention back to my father. I smiled. It was not a warm, comforting smile. It was a cold, calculated, and dangerous smile. "Dad," I said, my voice ringing with absolute authority, "we are not paying them a single cent. We are not taking out a commercial loan, and we are certainly not settling." My father looked up, his expression a mixture of confusion and sheer panic. "Monica, you are not listening to me. Patricia holds all the cards. If she goes to the DOT, my legacy is destroyed. I am the CEO, and I am telling you, we have to protect the business." I placed the blue legal folder on the desk and slid it precisely in front of him. I tapped the heavy cardstock cover with my index finger. "No, Dad. You are not the CEO. I corrected him gently but firmly. "Open it." My father stared in the folder, his hands trembling as he flipped open the cover. He began reading the first page, his eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. His breath hitched as he reached the second page, recognizing his own signature, my signature, and the stamps of our corporate attorneys. 6 months ago, I explained, pacing slowly behind my desk, I started noticing the discrepancies in our quarterly profit margins. I saw how Jason was isolating you, gaslighting you, and positioning his family to take over key departments. I knew they were planning a hostile takeover or a massive exit scam. But you were too blinded by guilt to see it. You would not let me fire them. My father kept reading, his hands shaking harder. "So I went to our corporate lawyers." I continued. "I took every dollar of my private investments, the trust fund Mom left me, and my personal stock portfolios. I used it to quietly buy out your majority voting shares through a blind proxy. I effectively purchased 51% of this company. I did not want to humiliate you, so I let you keep the title in name only. But legally, on paper, I am the CEO. I am the sole decision-maker. I hold ultimate authority over this company's future." My father looked up from the documents, utterly speechless. The realization of what I had done, the monumental risk I had taken to protect him from himself, washed over his face. "Patricia thinks she is extorting a tired, guilty old man who will roll over to protect his legacy," I said, leaning over the desk and locking eyes with him. "She has no idea she is dealing with me. I am not going to settle. I am going to war. My father stared at the legal buyout documents, his hands trembling as he realized he was no longer the captain of his own ship. The crushing weight of Jason and Patricia's extortion threat, the threat to destroy our Department of Transportation compliance, was completely neutralized by the cold, hard fact that I was now in absolute control. I did not raise my voice, nor did I offer him empty comforts. I simply instructed him to go home, turn off his phone, and let me handle the parasites who thought they could hold this family hostage. As he walked out of my office, looking older and more defeated than I had ever seen him, I did not waste a single second feeling sorry for the situation. I had ultimate authority, and my first act as the legal CEO was to obliterate the enemy's shadow operation. I immediately picked up my secure line and dialed a number I had kept tucked away for months. It was the direct contact for a premier corporate intelligence firm based in Washington, a team composed entirely of former federal financial investigators who specialized in untangling offshore shell games and corporate espionage. I authorized a massive retainer fee for my private accounts and gave them a singular non-negotiable directive. I wanted to know every single detail about Apex Holdings Group. I needed to know exactly where the stolen $4 million had gone, who was managing the accounts, and what Jason and Patricia were planning to do with the stolen capital. I demanded a complete forensic map of their digital and financial footprints. For the next 48 hours, I practically lived inside my executive suite. I slept on the leather sofa, drank endless cups of black coffee, and meticulously reviewed our internal security protocols while waiting for the intelligence firm to complete their deep dive. When the encrypted dossier finally arrived in my secure inbox, the contents were far more infuriating and malignant than a simple case of family greed. Jason was not spending the embezzled millions on luxury vacations, designer watches, or expensive sports cars. His ambition was much darker and far more calculated. He was using my father's stolen money to aggressively fund a rival logistics technology startup. The shell company was officially registered in Delaware under a new public-facing name, Apex Freight. Jason had legally positioned himself as the brilliant visionary chief executive officer of this new tech venture. Patricia was listed quietly on the board as the primary silent investor. They had taken the millions stolen through phantom shipping container invoices and used the cash to lease a sleek, modern high-rise office space in the heart of downtown Chicago. They had hired aggressive marketing teams, flashy software developers, and expensive public relations consultants. But the most enraging part of the private investigator's discovery was the core product of Apex Freight itself. Jason had not built a new logistics platform from scratch. He had completely stolen the foundational routing architecture that my actual engineers had spent 5 grueling years developing. He had simply taken our proprietary code, slapped a shiny new user interface over it, and was preparing to market it to the industry as his own revolutionary invention. He was trying to completely replace my company. He had drained our corporate accounts to build an exact clone of our operations, and his ultimate goal was to bankrupt Richard Logistics while simultaneously stepping in to absorb my entire market share. It was a masterclass in corporate parasitism. But the investigators had uncovered an even more immediate and terrifying threat. Buried deep within the financial expenditure records of Apex Freight was a massive non-refundable payment for an upcoming weekend event. Jason had rented out the penthouse ballroom at one of the most exclusive luxury hotels in downtown Chicago for a high-profile launch gala. He had also booked private jet travel and 5-star accommodations for a very specific, highly curated guest list. I scanned the names on the intercepted guest manifest, and my heart stopped dead in my chest. At the very top of his VIP list was the chief executive officer and the entire senior executive board of Titan Retail. I sat back in my leather chair, staring at the glowing monitor in absolute silence. The sheer, unadulterated arrogance of the man I had married was staggering. He genuinely believed I was too distracted by the emotional fallout of the divorce and the chaotic lobby protests to see the knife he was aiming right at my throat. He thought he had completely outsmarted me. I was just formulating a counter strategy analyzing how to protect the Titan retail account when the heavy oak doors of my office burst open violently. It was my lead IT director, a brilliant but perpetually anxious man named Marcus. He did not bother with his usual professional knock. He rushed into the room clutching a secure network tablet, his eyes wide behind his thick-framed glasses. He looked as though the building were physically on fire. "Monica, we have a massive critical problem," Marcus said, his voice breathless as he slammed the tablet onto my desk. "I thought we locked down the entire network when you fired the 19 relatives yesterday. We changed every single server code. We wiped all their devices remotely just like you ordered. We established a complete digital perimeter." "I did, Marcus," I replied, sitting up straight and narrowing my eyes. "Jason could not even log into the guest Wi-Fi in the lobby this morning. The firewall is absolute. What exactly is the issue?" "The issue is that we are currently hemorrhaging proprietary data," he said, swiping frantically on his screen to pull up a live network diagnostic graph. "Look at this outbound data stream." The red spikes on the graph were completely off the charts, indicating a massive sustained file transfer was actively in progress. "Someone on the inside is actively downloading our encrypted algorithms right now," Marcus explained, his voice rising with genuine panic. "They are pulling our live client pricing sheets, our entire regional delivery schedules, and the master database for our upcoming software patch. They are taking everything, Monica. The system is bleeding data as we speak." I stood up, my mind racing through the security protocols. How is that even physically possible? Every single one of Jason's family members was escorted out of the building. Their keycards are deactivated. How are they accessing the secure servers from the outside? Marcus shook his head violently, pointing to a string of rapid numbers on his diagnostic readout. "The breach is not coming from outside the firewall. This is not an external hack or a brute force attack. This is an authorized internal transfer. Someone sitting inside this very building right now is actively pulling the files and pushing them to an external cloud server." The realization hit me with the devastating force of a physical blow. The 19 people I had fired were just the loud, obnoxious distractions. They were the bloated payroll leeches holding fake titles to drain cash. But Jason was not stupid enough to leave his corporate espionage entirely in their lazy, incompetent hands. He had planted a mole. Someone who was smart enough to stay under the radar. Someone who had survived the massive wave of terminations because they were not officially listed on the human resources payroll. "Trace the IP address," I commanded, moving around my desk to stand directly next to Marcus. "Shut down the external ports and find out exactly which terminal is pulling those files. Do it right this second." Marcus nodded, his fingers flying across the digital keyboard of his tablet. He initiated a hard trace, bypassing the standard network protocols to drill directly into the internal hardware registry. I watched the screen intensely as the progress bar slowly ticked forward. Lines of complex code flashed across the display as Marcus hunted down the digital footprint of the traitor within my walls. "Got it," he whispered, his eyes narrowing at the screen. "It is coming from the 3rd floor, Sector 4. That is the independent contractor wing," I noted, my jaw tightening as the pieces of the puzzle slammed into place. Marcus tapped the screen, bringing up the registry information for that specific network node. "The terminal is logged in under a third-party vendor VPN portal. The account belongs to an independent consulting firm called Aesthetic Operations, LLC. We contracted them 8 months ago to handle our social media management and digital brand consulting." I stared at the name of the LLC. Aesthetic Operations. It sounded so harmless, so perfectly corporate and mundane. Because they were technically registered as a third-party vendor and paid through accounts payable rather than direct employee payroll, they had completely bypassed the aggressive human resources audit I had used to purge Jason's family. They had their own security badges, their own dedicated network access, and complete autonomy. "Pull up the contractor ID profile," I ordered, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. "Show me the registered owner of Aesthetic Operations, LLC." Marcus quickly typed the company name into our internal security database. A high-resolution security badge photograph materialized on the glowing screen. I stared at the digital image, my blood running absolutely cold. I looked at Marcus, who was waiting anxiously for my command, fully expecting me to order the security team to drag her out of the building immediately. But I did not. The cold rage inside me hardened into something far more calculated, sharp, and precise. I realized that Amanda was not just a security breach. She was an open digital pipeline leading directly to my enemies. I did not storm down to the third floor to confront Amanda. I did not call security to have her physically removed, and I certainly did not revoke her contractor access. I stared at her smiling digital photograph on the security monitor, the realization solidifying into a razor-sharp strategy. Amanda was not just a traitor. She was a direct, unmonitored line of communication straight into the heart of Jason's new operation. If I cut that line now, Jason would simply find another way to infiltrate my network. He would adapt. But if I left the line open, I could control exactly what information he received. I could weaponize his own mole. I looked at Marcus, my lead IT director, who was still waiting nervously for the order to shut her down. Marcus, I said, keeping my voice dangerously calm, do not touch her access. Leave her connection completely open. I want her to keep downloading our files. Marcus blinked, his confusion entirely genuine. Monica, she is stealing our core proprietary data. If she hands our routing algorithms over to Apex Freight, they will have a perfect carbon copy of our entire infrastructure. I smiled. They will have a perfect copy of exactly what I want them to have. For the next 3 days, I orchestrated a masterful performance of sheer, unadulterated corporate panic. I walked the floors of the executive suite, making sure to look visibly stressed. I loudly complained to my department heads, ensuring my voice carried down the hallways, about how the company's new updated logistics algorithm was too complex and completely unstable. I ranted about how our current software architecture was falling apart under the pressure of the upcoming holiday shipping season. I made sure everyone in the building believed that Richard Logistics was teetering on the edge of a catastrophic technological failure. Then I executed the most critical phase of the operation. I gathered my 3 most trusted senior software developers into a completely secure off-grid meeting room. I bypassed the standard company servers and used encrypted private hardware. I gave them a very specific, highly unusual directive. I needed them to build a Trojan horse. Once the corrupted master file was complete, I executed the bait. I deliberately placed the Trojan horse algorithm into a shared, unencrypted folder on the main corporate server. I labeled it as the final untested beta version of our new national routing protocol. I then purposefully left my office door wide open and went to lunch, ensuring the folder remained completely accessible. I spent the next 2 hours sitting in a secure surveillance room with Marcus watching the live network logs. The tension in the room was suffocating. We waited, our eyes glued to the digital readouts, praying that Jason's greed would override his caution. Then the security monitor flared to life. "There it is," Marcus whispered, pointing to a rapid spike on the data graph. "Terminal 3 Sector 4, Aesthetic Operations LLC. She just accessed the unencrypted folder." I watched the progress bar inch forward as Amanda initiated the download. She was moving quickly, recklessly, pulling the massive corrupted file directly onto her local hard drive. She didn't pause to verify the data. She didn't run a diagnostic check. She simply grabbed the bait and immediately initiated an external transfer to a secure cloud server, the very server we knew Jason was using to build Apex Freight. The download completed. The file transfer was successful. Amanda had stolen the digital equivalent of a live grenade, and she had just handed it directly to her brother. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling a long, slow breath. The trap was set. Jason had the corrupted code. He had the fake pricing sheets. He had everything he needed to completely obliterate his own startup. Now, all I had to do was wait for him to pull the pin. The wait was agonizingly short. Later that evening, I was sitting in my condo reviewing the actual legitimate shipping manifests for the upcoming week when my personal cell phone illuminated. The caller ID flashed Jason's name. I let it ring 3 times carefully, composing my expression and steadying my voice before finally answering. "Hello, Jason," I said, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. "Monica," he practically purred into the phone, his voice dripping with unbearable arrogant smugness. "I just wanted to call and check on you. I heard things were getting pretty stressful over at the old family business. Rumor has it your new software architecture is a complete disaster." I gripped the edge of my kitchen island, forcing myself to sound genuinely exhausted. "It is a minor glitch, Jason. We are handling it." He let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Right, handling it. Just like you handled our marriage. Monica, you have always been so utterly predictable. You work yourself to the bone, you ignore the people who actually support you, and then you act surprised when everything falls apart. You really thought you could run that massive logistics grid without my family's help. You thought you could just fire us and keep the machine running." I remained silent, letting him dig his own grave. "Well, I have some news that might add to your stress," he continued, his voice dropping into a cruel, taunting whisper. "I had a very interesting lunch today. I met with the senior executive board of Titan Retail." My heart skipped a beat, but I forced my voice to tremble slightly perfectly, playing the role of the panicked, desperate ex-wife. "You met with Titan. Jason, you cannot do that. They have an exclusive contract with us." "Contracts expire, Monica," he sneered, "and clients tend to migrate when they realize their current provider is using outdated, bloated software." I showed them a preview of the new logistics platform we developed at Apex Freight. They were absolutely blown away. "They realized that you have been overcharging them for years." He paused, clearly savoring the moment. I kept the phone pressed to my ear, listening to the dead dial tone long after Jason had hung up. The sheer volume of his arrogance was almost suffocating. He genuinely thought he had delivered the killing blow. He wanted me in the front row of his launch gala to watch him sign away my company's biggest client. I slowly lowered the phone and looked over at Marcus, who was still monitoring the live network logs on his tablet. "Did he take it all?" I asked, my voice perfectly steady. Marcus nodded, tapping the screen. "Amanda completed the transfer 10 minutes ago. She pushed the entire Trojan horse package directly to the Apex Freight cloud server. Jason has the corrupted algorithm, the fabricated delivery routes, and the mathematically impossible pricing metrics. He is completely locked and loaded for his live demonstration." A slow, cold smile spread across my face. Jason had always been predictable in his greed, but his desperate need for public validation was his ultimate fatal flaw. He could not just steal the Titan retail account quietly in a boardroom. He needed a stage. He needed an audience. He needed a launch gala to crown himself the new king of Chicago logistics, and he had just invited the executioner to sit in the front row. The next morning, the reality of Jason's grand spectacle began to materialize right on my desk. I was reviewing the overnight security logs when Kevin walked into my office. He was carrying a sleek black envelope sealed with a thick gold wax stamp. He set it down in front of me with a look of utter disgust. "A private courier just dropped this off at the front desk," Kevin said, crossing his arms. "The courier specifically said it was an urgent VIP delivery from Patricia, but that is not even the worst part, Monica. I was monitoring the flagged shell company accounts this morning. Patricia just pushed through another ghost invoice, $10,000 coded as warehouse maintenance supplies." I raised an eyebrow, looking at the black envelope. What did she actually buy? Kevin pulled out his tablet. I traced the routing number. The money went straight to an exclusive bridal and evening wear boutique on the Magnificent Mile. "Your former mother-in-law just used $10,000 of your father's stolen money to buy a designer gown for the Apex Freight launch gala." I let out a sharp, dry laugh. The audacity was truly breathtaking. They were bleeding our company dry to fund a party designed to put us out of business, and they were using our own money to buy the wardrobe for their victory lap. I reached out and broke the gold wax seal on the black envelope. Inside was a thick, heavy cardstock invitation trimmed in metallic gold foil. It was an exclusive all-access VIP pass for the Apex Freight launch gala, hosted at the Grand Ballroom of the Drake Hotel this coming Saturday evening. Tucked behind the polished invitation was a piece of personalized stationery. I pulled it out, recognizing Patricia's looping aggressive handwriting immediately. She could not resist the urge to twist the knife. Monica. The note read, I am sending you this front row ticket out of pity. You always worked so hard trying to prove you were smart, but you completely lacked the social grace and killer instinct required to compete in the real business world. Come watch my son show you how it is actually done. Try to dress nicely for once, Patricia. I read the words twice, letting the pure condescending venom wash over me. For years I had endured her snide comments about my dedication to the warehouse. I had swallowed her passive-aggressive insults about my lack of social refinement while I worked 80-hour weeks to fund her country club lifestyle. She actually believed that business was won by wearing expensive dresses and hosting lavish parties. She was about to learn a very brutal lesson about what real business actually looked like. I handed the note to Kevin. Put this in the legal file. It shows a clear, established link between Patricia and the operational launch of Apex Freight. She just handed us proof of her direct involvement in the corporate espionage. Kevin scanned the handwritten note, his jaw tightening. These people are absolutely delusional. Have you seen what they are posting online today? He tapped his tablet again and brought up Amanda's social media feed. My former sister-in-law was treating the upcoming gala like a royal coronation. Her feed was flooded with high-definition videos of the ballroom preparations. There were massive ice sculptures carved with the Apex Freight logo, towering champagne pyramids, and tables draped in imported silk. Amanda was practically vibrating with excitement, showing off her own designer dress and bragging about the exclusive guest list. In one video, Jason walked into the frame holding a glass of scotch, looking incredibly smug. We are revolutionizing the industry, Jason declared to the camera. This Saturday, we change the game. We are signing the biggest retail contract in the Midwest live on stage. The old dinosaurs of logistics are officially extinct. I watched the video loop again, studying Jason's arrogant expression. He had used my father's money to rent out the most expensive venue in Chicago. He had invited the CEO of Titan Retail, our biggest client, to stand on a stage and publicly abandon us. The entire extended family was gloating, treating the upcoming night as their ultimate triumph over my so-called incompetence. They think this is a game, I said, softly sliding the tablet back to Kevin. They think they can just take what they want and laugh about it on the internet. What is our next move? Kevin asked. Do we get our corporate lawyers to serve them with an injunction before the gala? We have the proof of the embezzlement. We can shut down the party right now. I shook my head, sliding the VIP invitation back into the black envelope. No. An injunction is quiet. An injunction happens in a closed courtroom behind closed doors. Jason and Patricia wanted a public spectacle. They wanted an audience. They wanted to humiliate me in front of the entire industry. I am going to give them exactly what they asked for. I am going to let them step onto that stage. I stood up from my desk and walked over to the biometric safe on the wall. I unlocked it and pulled out a small, heavy-duty encrypted flash drive. I tossed it onto the desk in front of Kevin. I need you to work with the forensic team tonight, I instructed. I want you to take every single piece of evidence we have gathered over the last 48 hours. The offshore banking routes, the ghost invoices for the shipping containers, the audio recording of Jason admitting to sabotaging our Department of Transportation compliance, the security footage of Amanda downloading our corrupted files, every single digital fingerprint that proves they stole $4 million to fund Apex Freight. Load it all onto this drive. Kevin looked down at the small piece of metal, his eyes widening as he understood the magnitude of what I was planning. You are going to hijack his presentation. Jason thinks he is going to run a live demonstration of his proprietary software. I explained, my voice cold and focused. He thinks he is going to show the CEO of Titan Retail a flawless logistics routing algorithm, but he is going to execute the Trojan horse. The system is going to crash, and when it does, I am going to step up to the podium and plug this drive directly into his master projector. I am going to broadcast their financial crimes on a 50-foot high-definition screen in front of every single investor and client they invited. I need more than just the digital files, I added, looking back at Kevin. I need you to reach out to Vance. He is the senior forensic auditor from the Washington intelligence firm we hired. I want Vance and his top financial investigator to fly into Chicago tomorrow morning. They are going to attend the gala with me." Kevin nodded quickly, grabbing the flash drive off the desk. "I will get them on the first flight out. We will have the drive fully loaded and triple-checked by Friday night." I spent the rest of the afternoon meticulously reviewing the final preparations. The trap was flawless. Every piece of the puzzle had been locked into place. Jason's arrogance had blinded him to the basic mechanics of network security. Patricia's greed had tied her directly to the stolen funds, and Amanda's reckless digital theft had provided the perfect vehicle to deliver the corrupted software. They had built their own gallows using my father's money. All I had to do was show up and pull the lever. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across my office, I picked up my personal cell phone. I opened my text messages and navigated to Jason's contact name. He was expecting me to cower. He was expecting me to ignore the invitation, or perhaps send an angry, emotional response begging him not to take Titan Retail away from us. Instead, I kept my message incredibly brief and terrifyingly calm. I typed out the words, ensuring there was absolutely no hint of panic or fear. I had barely taken a single breath to center myself when the sharp, sudden chime of my condo's security intercom shattered the silence. I walked over and tapped the video feed panel mounted on the wall. Standing in the rain-slicked entryway of my high-rise building was my father. He looked drenched, exhausted, and utterly terrified. I buzzed him up without a word. By the time I opened my front door, Richard was already pacing the carpeted hallway. He practically shoved his way inside the moment the latch clicked, ignoring the puddle his expensive Italian leather shoes were leaving on my pristine hardwood floor. He did not look like the titan of industry who had built Richard Logistics from a single delivery truck. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, staring down at his own demise. "Monica, you have to call it off," he blurted out, his chest heaving as he paced across my living room. He threw his wet trench coat over a dining chair. "Kevin told me what you are planning. He told me you flew in the Washington auditors. He told me about the flash drive. You cannot walk into that gala on Saturday." I leaned against the kitchen counter and crossed my arms, watching him spiral. "I can, and I absolutely will." "You are not thinking clearly," Richard pleaded, stepping toward me with his hands raised in surrender. "Titan Retail executives will be sitting in the front row. The local financial press will be covering the event. If you hijack Jason's presentation and broadcast our internal corporate theft to the entire industry, the public fallout will obliterate us. No major corporate client will ever trust us again. They will see Richard Logistics as a compromised, chaotic liability. We will become a media circus. They will see us as a company that surgically removes cancer." I countered, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "They will see a CEO who does not negotiate with terrorists." Richard grabbed the back of the sofa, his knuckles turning white. "Just let Titan Retail go, Monica. Let Jason take the contract. We can absorb the financial loss. We have a massive corporate war chest, and we can rebuild our client base in the southern states. Just let Jason have this one victory and walk away cleanly. If you corner Patricia in front of hundreds of people, she will release the Department of Transportation compliance violations. She will hand over the sabotage safety logs, and she will ground our entire fleet of trucks by Monday morning. We will lose everything." I did not raise my voice. I did not move from my spot. I simply stared at the man who had taught me everything I knew about business, watching him beg me to surrender to a pair of con artists. "Why did you let them in, Dad?" I asked. The question hung in the air, heavy and sharp. "I told you for 2 years that Jason's relatives were useless. I told you they were incompetent. I brought you performance reviews showing they were doing absolutely zero work. Yet you protected them. You shielded Patricia. You gave them 6-figure salaries and full network access. Why?" Richard flinched as if I had struck him. He dropped his gaze to the floor, his shoulders slumping under the crushing weight of his own guilt. He walked over to the kitchen island and sank onto a bar stool, burying his face in his hands. "Because you were never home, Monica," he whispered, his voice cracking with raw, unfiltered shame. "Patricia came to my office behind your back. She sat in my private guest chair and cried. She told me Jason was miserable. She said you worked 80-hour weeks and treated your husband like a mild inconvenience. She convinced me that Jason felt completely emasculated because you held all the financial power, all the corporate authority, and all the ambition. I felt my jaw tighten, and you believed her. I felt guilty, Richard confessed, dropping his hands and looking up at me with haunted eyes. I remembered what happened with your mother. I remembered how my obsession with building this company from the ground up completely destroyed my own marriage. I was terrified you were making my exact same mistakes. Patricia played on that fear. She told me that if I gave Jason's relatives high-paying, prominent positions in the executive suite, it would make Jason feel like a provider. She said it would integrate his family into our empire and make him feel respected. She swore to me it was the only way to save your marriage. I just wanted you to be happy, Monica. I let them infiltrate the payroll because I thought I was fixing your personal life. The psychological warfare Patricia had waged was masterful. She had identified my father's deepest, most painful regret and weaponized it against him. She had used his love for me to blind him to the greatest corporate theft in our company's history. I did not scream. I did not throw things or break down into tears. The anger inside me was absolute zero. It was cold-focused and entirely lethal. I turned away from my father and walked into my open-concept home office space, tucked into the corner of the living room. I sat down at my desk and tapped the keyboard, waking up the massive curved high-definition monitor. "Come here, Dad," I commanded. Richard stood up slowly and walked over, standing behind my ergonomic chair. I opened the encrypted dossier the Washington intelligence firm had delivered to me. The screen flooded with dense, meticulously organized financial grids, offshore banking routes, and time-stamped digital security logs. "You think Patricia and Jason stole from us because my marriage was failing," I said, keeping my eyes locked on the glowing data. "You think they got greedy because they felt neglected. You think this was an opportunistic crime of passion." I clicked a folder labeled Initial Corporate Formation and opened a scanned legal document. "I want you to look at this date," I instructed, pointing to a highlighted line of text at the top of the screen. June 14th. Do you remember what happened on June 14th? Richard squinted at the screen, confusion replacing his panic. "That was the day of your wedding. That was the day you and Jason got married." "Exactly," I replied, clicking to the next document in the sequence. "Now look at this date. June 18th. We were sitting on a private beach in Maui for our honeymoon. This document is a corporate registration filing from the Cayman Islands. This is the exact day Patricia established the first offshore shell company. She opened the account that would eventually be used to funnel $4 million out of Richard Logistics. She set up the financial plumbing 4 days after I said my vows." Richard gasped, his hand gripping the back of my chair for support. I clicked a third file, bringing up a complex network security log. "This is a digital access record from our internal servers." I continued, my voice ruthlessly clinical. "This timestamp is from July 2nd. I had been married for less than 3 weeks. This is the exact moment Jason used his new executive clearance to secretly download our foundational client database. He did not take it to study our business model. He took it to begin building the target list for Apex Freight." I spun my chair around to face my father. He was staring at the monitor in absolute horror. The blood had completely drained from his face as the devastating reality shattered his carefully constructed illusions of guilt. "They did not steal from us to compensate for a bad marriage, Dad," I said, leaning forward. "They did not exploit the company because I worked too much. Jason never loved me. He never wanted to be my husband. This entire relationship, from the moment he spilled a drink on me at that networking mixer 3 years ago, was a calculated, predatory long con. The wedding was not a celebration. It was a corporate heist. I was nothing more than the golden key they needed to unlock your bank accounts." Richard stumbled backward, collapsing heavily onto the edge of the sofa. He looked like he could not breathe. "My God," he whispered, clutching his chest. "The entire time they were smiling at us, eating at our dinner table, they were digging our graves." "Yes," I confirmed, standing up and unplugging the heavy-duty encrypted flash drive from the side of my monitor. I held the small metallic device in the palm of my hand. "This drive holds the entire forensic timeline. It holds the proof of their shell companies, the stolen code, the fake invoices, and the Department of Transportation blackmail attempt. I walked over and stood directly in front of him. Patricia sent a courier to my door this morning. I told him, my tone shifting into absolute steel. She bought a $10,000 designer gown using our stolen money, and she sent me a VIP ticket to the launch gala. She left a handwritten note calling me socially unfit to compete in the real business world. She thinks she has won. She thinks I am going to stay home and cry while Jason signs Titan Retail over to Apex Freight. Richard looked up at me, his eyes shining with a mixture of profound sorrow and sudden blazing realization. What are you going to do, Monica? I am going to put on the most expensive dress I own, I replied, slipping the flash drive into my pocket. I am going to walk into the grand ballroom of the Drake Hotel with 2 federal financial investigators. I am going to sit in the front row. And when Jason steps up to that podium to demonstrate the software he stole from me, I am going to burn his entire bloodline to the ground. The heavy, ornate brass doors of the Drake Hotel Grand Ballroom swung open, and I stepped over the threshold into the lion's den. The air inside was thick with the scent of expensive cologne roasted filet mignon and the unmistakable metallic tang of corporate greed. I wore a floor-length emerald green silk gown with sharp architectural lines that cost more than my first car. I did not walk like a defeated ex-wife who had just been publicly discarded. I walked like an apex predator entering a pen full of incredibly naive sheep. Flanking me on either side were Vance and his top financial investigator, a sharp-eyed woman named Sarah. They wore immaculate dark suits and carried nothing but a single heavy leather briefcase between them. The ballroom was exactly the gaudy spectacle Amanda had broadcasted on her social media feed. Towering ice sculptures carved into the shape of the Apex Freight logo dominated the 4 corners of the room, slowly melting into silver catch basins. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos carried silver trays of vintage champagne, weaving gracefully through a crowd composed of Chicago's most influential logistics executives, powerful freight brokers, and wealthy supply chain managers. These were my clients. These were my competitors. And Jason had invited them all here to watch my execution. Patricia and Jason were holding court near the massive open bar at the exact center of the room. Patricia wore a shimmering silver designer gown that clung tightly to her frame. She clutched a crystal flute of champagne, throwing her head back and laughing loudly at something an investor had just said. Jason stood beside her, radiating the slick, arrogant energy of a man who firmly believed he had just conquered the world. He was speaking animatedly, gesturing with his hands to a group of my top regional clients, playing the part of the visionary founder to absolute perfection. I signaled for Vance and Sarah to hang back. I pointed discreetly toward the audio-visual control booth, elevated at the rear of the room. Vance gave me a single curt nod, and the 2 investigators melted into the shadows along the perimeter wall, moving with the silent efficiency of federal agents. I squared my shoulders and walked directly toward the bar. The moment Patricia spotted me slicing through the dense crowd, her eyes lit up with malicious, unadulterated glee. She did not see my arrival as a threat. She saw it as my ultimate submission. She genuinely thought I had come to beg for mercy or to try and salvage some scrap of dignity. She tapped the arm of a prominent venture capitalist standing next to her and deliberately raised her voice, ensuring her words carried easily over the ambient hum of the string quartet playing in the background. "Look, everyone," Patricia announced, her voice dripping with artificial saccharine sympathy. "My former daughter-in-law actually decided to show up tonight. I am so glad you came, Monica. It is incredibly important to face these difficult transitions with dignity." She turned back to the tight circle of wealthy investors, gesturing toward me with her champagne glass, as if I were a tragic exhibit in a museum. "I was just telling these gentlemen about the difficult corporate transition we have been managing." Patricia continued, pitching her voice louder so the neighboring tables would turn to listen. "It has been absolutely exhausting trying to save my poor, incompetent daughter-in-law's failing company for the last 2 years. Richard Logistics was completely drowning under her lack of vision and her terrible management style. It was such a tragic waste of legacy potential." But thankfully, I am now officially backing my son's brilliant new venture. Apex Freight is going to show this stagnant industry what real aggressive leadership actually looks like. A heavy, awkward hush fell over the immediate area. Several executives who had done business with me for years shifted uncomfortably on their feet, their eyes darting nervously between Patricia's gloating, triumphant smile and my totally stoic expression. They expected me to flush with deep embarrassment. They expected me to stutter to defend myself or to turn around and run out of the ballroom in tears. Instead, I calmly stepped up to the mahogany bar. I caught the bartender's eye, asked for a glass of sparkling water with a twist of lime, and took a slow, deliberate sip. The cold water slid down my throat, grounding me. I turned slowly back to Patricia, offering her a smile so completely devoid of warmth it could have frozen the champagne right inside her crystal flute. "You look absolutely stunning in that silver dress, Patricia," I said, my voice perfectly even and carrying just as far across the room as hers had. "I am so incredibly glad you found a way to afford it. Enjoy your evening." I did not wait for her to process the insult. I turned my back on her sputtering, confused face and walked straight down the center aisle toward the main stage at the front of the ballroom. I found the front row seating explicitly reserved for VIP guests. I took my seat directly in the center, crossing my legs elegantly and resting my hands quietly in my lap. I glanced over my shoulder. Vance and Sarah had successfully bypassed the hotel security staff and were now positioned directly behind the primary audio-visual technician booth. I caught Vance's eye across the expanse of the ballroom. He gave me a sharp thumbs up. The encrypted flash drive was locked and loaded. We had direct hardwired access to the massive high-definition screen suspended directly behind the podium. 15 minutes later, the grand overhead chandeliers dimmed to a soft amber glow. A pulsing modern electronic beat echoed through the state-of-the-art sound system, signaling the start of the keynote presentation. The crowd murmured in anticipation, finishing their drinks, finding their assigned seats, and turning their collective attention to the front of the room. A brilliant white spotlight hit the center of the stage. Jason walked out from behind the heavy black velvet curtains, holding a sleek wireless microphone. He looked out over the sea of upturned faces, soaking in the wave of polite applause. He walked like a Silicon Valley visionary, pacing the stage with casual, practiced arrogance. He wore a tailored midnight blue suit, with no tie, projecting the exact image of a disruptive tech founder ready to change the world. "Thank you all for coming tonight," Jason began, his voice booming through the massive speakers and commanding the room. "We are standing at the very edge of a new era. For decades, the Midwest logistics industry has been hopelessly bogged down by outdated legacy companies that rely on bloated family payrolls, incredibly inefficient routing systems, and antique software architecture that belongs in the Stone Age." He paused, letting his gaze sweep deliberately across the front row until he locked eyes directly with me. He smirked, leaning closer into the microphone, his voice dropping into a register of pure mocking superiority. "Tonight we changed the game entirely," Jason declared. "Apex Freight is not just a logistics company. We are a premier technology company. Thanks to some incredibly smart private investments, we have built a proprietary routing algorithm from the ground up. Our new system will cut commercial shipping costs by 30%, while actively increasing delivery speed and route efficiency across the board. We are leaner, we are faster, and we are unequivocally smarter than any legacy firm currently dying on the market." The crowd erupted into enthusiastic applause. Jason was selling the lie brilliantly. He was selling my actual code, my dedicated infrastructure, and my father's stolen money as his own personal genius. He paced to the other side of the stage, nodding at the audience. "But words are just words." Jason continued, raising a hand to quiet the buzzing room. "At Apex Freight, we believe in aggressive action. We believe in immediate results. And tonight, we are not just launching a new software platform. We are launching a historic partnership that will completely redefine national retail distribution." He stopped pacing and gestured grandly toward the front row, pointing his hand specifically toward a distinguished silver-haired man sitting just 3 seats away from me. David Sterling, the Chief Executive Officer of Titan Retail. Jason puffed out his chest, completely intoxicated by his own stolen power. Ladies and gentlemen, I am incredibly honored to announce that Titan Retail, the largest and most successful big box chain in the Midwest, has recognized the superior architecture of Apex Freight. I would like to invite the CEO of Titan Retail, David Sterling, to join me up here on the stage. Tonight, we are going to sign a binding letter of intent to transfer their entire Midwest distribution network exclusively to Apex Freight. Let us give him a massive round of applause. The ballroom exploded into thunderous standing applause. Losing the Titan Retail account was the absolute death knell for any logistics firm, and every single industry insider in that room knew exactly what this public signing meant for my company. Jason stood tall at the podium, looking directly down at me over the cheering crowd. His eyes were shining with cruel absolute victory. He fully expected me to break. He expected me to stand up thoroughly humiliated and utterly defeated and run out of the ballroom crying before the ink even dried on his stolen contract. I did not move a single muscle. I kept my eyes locked fiercely on his, my expression carved from solid stone, waiting for the trap to spring. David Sterling stood up from his VIP seat. The heavy applause slowly died down as the towering corporate executive adjusted his tailored suit jacket and walked purposefully up the short flight of stairs to the main stage. Jason stepped forward eagerly, his hand extended in a warm greeting, ready to hand over the branded presentation pen to sign the documents resting on the podium. But David Sterling did not take Jason's outstretched hand. He walked straight past the arrogant founder and stepped directly up to the podium. He took the wireless microphone off the stand, gripping it tightly. The massive ballroom fell into an awkward, incredibly heavy silence. Jason lowered his hand, a flicker of genuine confusion, finally breaking through his smug facade. David looked out over the crowd of silent executives, his face grave and entirely unreadable. Then he looked directly down at the front row, locking his eyes right onto mine. Jason has told us a lot about the future tonight, David said, his deep, resonant voice carrying a strange, heavy authority that commanded absolute attention. He has made some very bold promises regarding innovation and efficiency. But before Titan Retail signs any binding documents, and before we finalize anything regarding this massive transition of our supply chain, I think it is only fair we hear from the person who actually built the foundation of this entire industry. David extended his hand toward me, his expression softening into a look of profound respect. Monica. David said, his voice echoing perfectly through the silent ballroom. Would you please join us up here on the stage? I think you should say a few words before we finalize anything. I stood up from my seat in the front row. The silence in the grand ballroom of the Drake Hotel was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket that had instantly smothered the previously vibrant networking session. You could hear the soft, deliberate rustle of my emerald green silk gown as I moved past the velvet ropes of the VIP seating area. I did not rush. I did not lower my gaze, nor did I betray a single ounce of the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I walked up the short flight of carpeted stairs with the steady, measured, terrifying pace of an executioner ascending the block. Every eye in the room was locked onto me, waiting for the humiliated ex-wife to finally crack under the immense pressure of public defeat. David Sterling, the Chief Executive Officer of Titan Retail, met me halfway across the polished wooden stage. He offered a slight, respectful nod, his silver hair catching the bright glare of the overhead spotlights, and handed me the wireless microphone. I took it from his outstretched hand, my fingers perfectly steady. The cold metal grounded me, anchoring me to the reality of the trap I was about to spring. I turned slowly to face the audience. Hundreds of the most powerful people in Midwest logistics, wealthy venture capitalists, aggressive freight brokers, and elite supply chain managers were staring back at me in stunned, breathless fascination. In the second row, Patricia looked as though all the oxygen had been violently sucked out of her lungs. Her jaw hung slightly slack, and the smug, triumphant glow that had radiated from her all evening had completely evaporated. Her $10,000 shimmering silver designer gown suddenly looked like cheap, inadequate armor against the crushing reality of my presence on that stage. She gripped her crystal champagne flute so tightly, I thought the glass might shatter in her hand. I turned my absolute attention to Jason. He was standing awkwardly near the clear acrylic presentation podium, his slick, practiced confidence entirely replaced by a rigid, wide-eyed panic. He looked at me, then darted a frantic, desperate glance at David Sterling, completely paralyzed by the sudden, unscripted shift in his carefully orchestrated coronation. He had expected me to cower. He had expected me to flee the ballroom in tears the moment he announced his victory. He had banked his entire public relations strategy on my perceived emotional fragility. Instead, I was standing 10 feet away from him, holding the microphone he had just used to mock me, radiating an aura of absolute, untouchable authority. I smiled at him. It was a flawless, professional, encouraging smile that completely hid the razor wire wrapped tightly around my intentions. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice echoing crisply and clearly through the massive state of the art ballroom speakers. "I know my presence on this stage tonight is quite a surprise to many of you. Corporate transitions are rarely easy, and they are almost never graceful. But we are all seasoned professionals in this room. We understand that this incredibly demanding industry requires constant evolution, thick skin, and unyielding forward momentum. We do not survive in logistics by clinging to the past. We survive by embracing genuine innovation." I took a slow, deliberate step toward the podium, commanding the physical space of the stage. The tension in the air was so thick it felt like physical static electricity against my skin. "Jason has made some truly remarkable claims tonight," I continued, keeping my tone perfectly measured and entirely devoid of malice. "He has promised Titan Retail and everyone else sitting in this room a revolutionary leap forward in logistics technology. He has promised faster delivery routes, drastically lower overhead dynamic fuel consumption algorithms, and a proprietary software platform that supposedly outperforms anything currently operating on the national market." As the legal chief executive officer of Richard Logistics, a company that has spent decades building the very foundational infrastructure Jason intends to replace, I firmly believe that true innovation deserves to be recognized, tested, and validated. I stopped walking, standing just a few feet away from my ex-husband. I could see the fine sheen of nervous sweat beginning to form on his forehead under the hot stage lights. I did not yell. I did not scream about stolen code-breached firewalls or the millions of dollars he and his mother had embezzled from my family. I let my voice carry a tone of smooth professional curiosity, baiting the trap with surgical precision. In fact, I am so deeply intrigued by the massive claims Apex Freight has made tonight. I think we should bypass the standard congratulatory speeches, I announced, gesturing broadly toward the audience. Before David Sterling signs any binding letters of intent, and before Titan Retail commits its entire Midwest distribution network to a brand new untested platform, we should see this revolutionary technology in action. I turned directly to Jason, locking my eyes onto his terrified gaze. I tilted my head slightly, projecting an image of harmless, supportive interest. "Jason, you have your master dashboard queued up for the presentation," I said, raising an eyebrow in a silent, inescapable challenge. "Why do not you run a live, real-time demonstration of your proprietary route optimization software for the audience right now? Show us exactly how your brilliant algorithm handles a simulated national deployment under pressure. Prove to the investors and to David that Apex Freight is the undeniable future of the industry." Jason swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly above the collar of his tailored midnight blue suit. He looked out at the audience, his eyes darting frantically across the sea of expectant faces. The wealthy investors who had funded his gala were nodding in eager agreement, completely oblivious to the lethal tension radiating from the podium. They wanted a show. David Sterling stood firmly to the side of the stage, his arms crossed over his chest, waiting expectantly for the demonstration. Jason was entirely trapped by his own massive ego and his desperate clawing need for public validation. To refuse the live demonstration now would look like profound weakness. It would look like he was hiding critical flaws from his biggest prospective client, effectively killing the Titan retail deal before the ink could even touch the paper. His arrogance combined with the absolute unwavering certainty that his sister Amanda had successfully stolen our flawless master routing code pushed him right over the edge. He genuinely believed the software on his drive was my pristine algorithm. Of course, Jason said, his voice cracking slightly before he cleared his throat and recovered his slick corporate tone. We would be absolutely thrilled to show Titan Retail the sheer power of the Apex algorithm. He stepped up to the acrylic podium and tapped the control touchpad. The heavy black velvet curtains parted further, and a massive 50-foot high definition projection screen illuminated brightly behind us. The crisp, sleek user interface of Jason's stolen software filled the display, casting a cool blue glow over the stage and the front rows of the audience. A highly detailed interactive digital map of the United States appeared, dotted with thousands of glowing distribution hubs, active shipping lanes, and live traffic metrics. The graphics were undeniably stunning. The interface was flawless, intuitive, and visually arresting. The top left corner displayed a dynamic weather integration feed, while the bottom right corner showed a rolling ticker of simulated fleet maintenance statuses. I had to admit, the visual shell his expensive developers had wrapped around my stolen code looked incredibly impressive. It was the perfect shiny disguise for the digital poison lurking just beneath the surface. Let us run a full-scale 48-hour predictive routing sequence for the entire Midwest corridor. Jason announced, his confidence fully returning as he grabbed the podium microphone and played to the captivated crowd. He was in his element, now convinced he was about to deliver the final crushing blow. Watch closely how the Apex algorithm instantly optimizes delivery schedules, aggressively cuts fuel costs by predicting traffic density, and bypasses regional weather delays with absolute precision and zero human input. He reached down and hit the execute command heavily on his keyboard. I stood perfectly still, silently counting the seconds in my head. For exactly 10 seconds, the massive display was a masterpiece of modern software engineering. It was a symphony of digital logistics. Bright, glowing blue lines shot rapidly across the digital map, efficiently connecting regional distribution centers to local retail outlets with mathematical perfection. Tiny truck icons moved seamlessly along the highways, dodging red traffic zones with graceful, algorithmic recalculations. Real-time cost metrics flashed in bright green at the bottom of the screen, showing massive, instantaneous projected savings ticking upward by the thousands. The audience murmured in genuine appreciation and awe. I saw several venture capitalists lean forward in their seats, completely captivated by the smooth, rapid processing speed of the software. Patricia clapped her hands silently in the front row, a look of vindicated pride washing over her face. Jason stepped away from the podium, gesturing grandly to the massive screen behind him like a magician completing his final impossible trick. He looked down at me, a victorious, arrogant smirk plastered across his face. He thought he had just won the war. He thought he had just sealed my fate, humiliated me in front of my peers, and successfully secured his fraudulent empire. Then the Trojan horse code activates. The system crashes live on screen, displaying catastrophic logistical failures, routing trucks into oceans, and generating massive multi-million-dollar financial deficits. The entire ballroom gasps as Jason frantically smashes his keyboard, trying to stop the presentation. The giant screen flashed violently from a serene corporate blue to a blaring hostile crimson. Warning windows stacked over each other in rapid succession, bleeding across the visual interface. The seamless blue lines representing optimized freight routes suddenly fractured. The algorithm began projecting delivery paths straight through the center of the Great Lakes and routing fleet trucks directly into the Atlantic Ocean. Fuel consumption metrics inverted, calculating costs in the billions of dollars per hour. Delivery times scrambled into massive negative numbers. The system was eating itself alive in front of 300 industry elites. Jason hammered his fingers against the keyboard. The sharp, frantic clacking echoed through the microphone clipped to his lapel. He jabbed the escape key, sweating profusely, but Amanda's stolen corrupted package had buried itself deep into his system architecture. The more he tried to abort the sequence, the faster the error messages multiplied. "Turn it off!" Jason hissed at the audiovisual booth, completely abandoning his polished founder persona. "Cut the feed right now. Cut the main projector." Behind the glass of the control booth at the back of the room, Vance simply leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. The projector remained blazing bright. I walked the remaining 10 feet to the acrylic podium. Jason was hyperventilating, his hands shaking so badly he could barely grip the edges of his own laptop. He looked at me with wild, bloodshot eyes. He finally understood that I had not come to witness my execution. I had brought the guillotine. "Move," I commanded softly. He was too paralyzed by the catastrophic failure of his public debut to resist. I reached past him and firmly pulled the master display cable out of the side of his computer. The massive screen behind us went pitch black. The sudden darkness drew a collective sharp intake of breath from the audience. I pulled the heavy encrypted flash drive from my clutch, the one Kevin and Vance had prepared meticulously, and slid it into the primary input port mounted directly on the podium. I tapped the touchscreen interface. The screen behind us roared back to life in blinding high-definition clarity. There were no sleek maps or animated trucks. There was only raw, brutal data. The projection displayed a massive split-screen financial ledger. On the left side was the internal payroll and expense account of Richard Logistics. On the right side was the foundational startup capital account for Apex Freight. The dates, routing numbers, and transfer amounts were highlighted in bright, undeniable yellow. I adjusted the microphone, letting my voice carry across the silent, stunned ballroom. "What you just witnessed was not a software glitch," I told the crowd of executives and investors. "It was the exact algorithm Jason stole from my private servers 3 days ago. However, my internal security team engineered a specific safeguard. If the code was ever removed from our closed network, it was programmed to completely cannibalize its own routing logic. Jason did not build a revolutionary logistics platform. He simply stole mine, and he lacked the technical competence to realize it was booby-trapped." A wave of shocked murmurs rolled through the audience. I saw a prominent venture capitalist in the third row set his drink down on a passing waiter's tray, his face draining of color as he stared at the financial ledgers displayed above me. "But intellectual property theft is only a fraction of the reality behind Apex Freight." I continued tapping the podium screen to advance the slide. "Let us look at the real foundation of this company." Jason stood up here tonight and thanked his smart private investors. "I would like to show you exactly who those investors are." I pointed to the left side of the screen. Over the past 24 months, Richard Logistics suffered a targeted internal embezzlement campaign. A series of ghost employees were added to our payroll by a trusted executive. Millions of dollars were systematically funneled out of our operating budget under the guise of fictitious warehouse maintenance and fabricated international container leases. I tapped the screen again. A complex web of red arrows appeared connecting the offshore shell companies directly to the primary banking accounts of Apex Freight. Every single dollar used to fund this launch gala, to lease this ballroom, to build those ice sculptures, and to capitalize this fraudulent startup, was stolen directly from my father's company. I declared, my voice ringing with absolute authority. Jason did not raise capital. He embezzled $4 million. I scrolled the ledger down, bringing up a highly specific time-stamped bank transfer from that very morning. In fact, I added my eyes, scanning the front row until they landed directly on my former mother-in-law. Just 12 hours ago, $10,000 of stolen corporate funds were routed through a shell company in the Cayman Islands to purchase a designer silver gown from an exclusive boutique on the Magnificent Mile. Every head in the immediate vicinity snapped around to look at Patricia. She shrank back into her chair, her face turning an incredibly bright mottled shade of crimson. The silver dress she was wearing suddenly felt like a neon sign broadcasting her complicity to the entire room. "That is a lie," Jason shouted, his voice cracking violently as he lunged back toward the podium. His face was slick with sweat. He pointed a trembling finger at the massive screen. "She is making this up. She fabricated these documents because she is a bitter, jealous ex-wife who cannot handle that I am taking her biggest client." These are fake ledgers. She is trying to ruin me because I left her. David Sterling, the CEO of Titan Retail, stepped forward. He stood perfectly still, his eyes locked onto the undeniable financial trail connecting the two companies. He did not look at Jason. He looked only at me. "Can you verify these claims?" Monica David asked, his voice low and incredibly dangerous. "Because if I am standing on a stage with a man who funded a company through corporate espionage, I need more than a spreadsheet." I turned to face David, offering him a slight respectful nod. "I absolutely can, David. Ledgers can be disputed by expensive defense attorneys. Bank routing numbers can be obfuscated by offshore tax havens. But ego is incredibly difficult to hide." I tapped the final file on the touchscreen interface. A stark black audio waveform appeared across the massive projection screen. "Last week I discovered that our Department of Transportation compliance logs had been maliciously altered," I explained to the silent room. "Someone had deliberately falsified driver safety records and maintenance schedules, attempting to trigger a federal audit that would have permanently grounded my entire fleet." I called Jason to confront him about the sabotage. He did not realize I was recording the call on a federally admissible encrypted server. Jason let out a strangled, panicked sound. He reached for the master power switch on the podium, but David Sterling reached out and clamped a heavy hand down on Jason's shoulder, stopping him dead in his tracks. "Play it," David commanded. I hit the play button. The crystal-clear high-definition audio of Jason's voice echoed through the Drake Hotel Grand Ballroom, bouncing off the vaulted ceilings and silencing any remaining doubt. "You really think anyone is going to believe you?" Jason's recorded voice sneered, dripping with the exact same arrogance he had displayed on stage just 10 minutes earlier. "I changed the safety codes myself, Monica. I routed the ghost payroll through my mother's accounts. By the time the Department of Transportation finishes their audit, Richard Logistics will be a pile of ash. And I am going to be standing on a stage at the Drake Hotel, signing Titan Retail right out from under you. You are nothing but a bank account to me, Monica. A stupid, naive bank account that paid for my real empire." The audio clip ended. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating quiet that occurs in the immediate aftermath of a catastrophic explosion. The venture capitalists who had been cheering for Jason moments before were now pulling out their cell phones, frantically typing messages to their legal teams. The freight brokers were staring at Jason with expressions of pure, unadulterated disgust. Jason stood frozen at the edge of the stage. The color had completely drained from his face, leaving him a sickly, pallid gray. His mouth opened and closed silently. The undeniable reality of his own voice confessing to federal crimes and corporate sabotage had completely dismantled his entire reality. He had built his gallows, and I had just kicked the trapdoor wide open. Then the silence was shattered by a sharp, piercing shriek from the ballroom floor. "Stop it! Stop this right now!" Patricia shoved her way past a group of stunned investors, her silver designer gown catching on the edge of a cocktail table. She knocked a tray of champagne glasses to the floor, the crystal shattering loudly against the polished hardwood. She did not care. She was completely unhinged, her carefully constructed high society persona dissolving into raw, frantic hysteria. She scrambled up the short flight of stairs to the stage, her face twisted into a mask of pure rage. She pointed a manicured finger directly at my face, screaming at the top of her lungs. "These are lies. These are forged documents. You planted that recording. You are just a hysterical, jealous ex-wife trying to ruin my son because he realized you were completely useless." She turned frantically toward David Sterling, grabbing the sleeve of his expensive suit jacket. David looked down at her hand as if she were a diseased insect. "David, you cannot listen to this crazy woman." Patricia begged, her voice shrill and desperate. "She is just trying to stop progress. My son is a genius. Apex Freight is the future. Sign the contract. Sign the contract right now and ignore her. Show this pathetic little girl how real business is done." David Sterling looked down at the frantic, screaming woman clawing at his sleeve. He did not say a single word immediately. He simply raised his left hand and carefully, deliberately pried Patricia's shaking fingers off his expensive wool jacket. He dropped her hand with a look of profound, unmasked revulsion, brushing the fabric of his sleeve, as if he had just been forced to handle toxic waste. The sheer contempt in his eyes made Patricia stumble backward, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly as the reality of his reaction hit her. David stepped up to the podium and retrieved the wireless microphone from the acrylic stand. He completely ignored Jason, who was still hyperventilating, and staring blankly at the catastrophic red error messages bleeding across the 50-foot projection screen. David turned his broad shoulders toward the audience, his presence immediately commanding the absolute silence of the room. "Real business!" David echoed, his deep voice rolling over the hundreds of stunned executives and investors in the grand ballroom. "You want me to show this pathetic little girl how real business is done?" He let out a short, humorless laugh that echoed sharply off the vaulted ceiling. He turned his head slowly, fixing Patricia with a glare so cold it made several people in the front row physically flinch. "Patricia, you are under the profound delusion that you are swimming in a pool with guppies," David stated, his tone ruthlessly clinical. "You and your son actually believed you could orchestrate a sloppy, amateurish embezzlement scheme, steal proprietary software from a legacy logistics firm, slap a new coat of paint on it, and then invite the chief executive officer of a multi-billion-dollar retail empire to a hotel ballroom to blindly sign over his entire supply chain. You thought I would hand the keys to Titan Retail over to a man who does not even understand the basic architecture of the code he claimed to have built." A collective gasp rippled through the audience. The wealthy venture capitalists who had funded the gala began muttering frantically to one another. The illusion of Apex Freight was disintegrating before their eyes, replaced by the terrifying specter of federal fraud investigations. David turned away from the devastated mother and looked out at the Chicago elite. "Let me explain exactly how real business is actually conducted," David announced. 8 days ago, I received a secure encrypted communication directly from Monica. She did not ask for a meeting to beg for my continued patronage. She did not send a desperate email complaining about unfair competition. She flew directly to Titan Retail headquarters in Minneapolis. She walked into my private boardroom, sat down at my table, and handed me the exact forensic ledgers you are all looking at on that screen right now. She showed me the offshore accounts. She showed me the stolen Department of Transportation logs. And most importantly, she showed me the exact digital fingerprint of the Trojan horse she had planted in her own system before Jason managed to steal it. Jason let out a strangled, whimpering sound, clutching the sides of the podium as his knees threatened to buckle. He looked completely hollowed out. "My internal cybersecurity division spent 72 hours analyzing the stolen code Jason planned to launch tonight." David continued, twisting the knife with methodical precision. "We ran our own isolated simulations. We watched the exact same catastrophic routing failures you just witnessed. We knew unequivocally that if Titan Retail had actually migrated our distribution network to Apex Freight, our entire Midwest supply chain would have collapsed within 4 hours. Millions of dollars in perishable inventory would have been destroyed. Our retail outlets would have been left empty." David turned back to Jason, looking at the trembling founder with absolute disgust. "You invited me here tonight to be your unwitting prop," David sneered. "You wanted a photo opportunity. You wanted the prestige of the Titan Retail brand to legitimize your fraudulent company to these investors. But Monica and I decided that a quiet injunction was simply not enough. Corporate espionage is a cancer, and it needs to be excised in the bright light of day so that the infection does not spread. We planned this public demonstration together. We wanted every single investor in this room to see exactly where their money went and exactly what kind of incompetent thieves they were backing." The reaction from this crowd was instantaneous and utterly devastating. The venture capitalists in the front rows began standing up, their faces flushed with rage. Several men in expensive suits began shouting directly at Patricia, demanding to know where their millions of dollars in startup capital had actually been routed. The freight brokers, who had been schmoozing with Jason all night, backed away from the stage as if it were rigged with explosives. Patricia was completely surrounded by angry, shouting investors. She covered her ears with her hands, sobbing uncontrollably as her high society status was publicly and permanently obliterated. David Sterling raised a hand demanding quiet once more. The room slowly settled down, eager to hear the final verdict. David reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a thick, folded legal document. "This is the letter of intent Jason sent to my office yesterday," David said, holding the crisp white paper up to the spotlight. "This is the document he expected me to sign tonight, transferring our Midwest logistics contracts over to Apex Freight." With a swift, aggressive motion, David ripped the document entirely in half, then ripped the halves again, letting the shredded pieces of paper flutter down onto the polished wooden stage. "Titan Retail does not negotiate with thieves, and we certainly do not entrust our future to amateurs," David declared. "Instead, I am incredibly proud to announce that this morning, Titan Retail officially signed a new 10-year exclusive distribution contract with Richard Logistics. We are doubling our regional freight volume, and we are expanding Monica's operational territory to cover our entire national footprint. We know exactly who has the competence, the vision, and the absolute ruthlessness required to protect our assets." I remained seated in the front row, keeping my posture perfectly straight. I did not smile, but a deep, satisfying warmth spread through my chest. The war was officially over. I had not just saved my company, I had secured its future for the next decade. But David was not finished. He turned back to the microphone, his expression hardening into pure granite. "As for Apex Freight, the celebration is officially over." David announced, his voice echoing like a judge delivering a life sentence. "Corporate espionage against a primary partner of Titan Retail is an attack on our bottom line. I have already authorized our corporate legal division to join forces with Monica's legal team. As of this moment, Titan Retail is launching a massive joint civil lawsuit against Apex Freight Jason and Patricia for corporate espionage, wire fraud, tortious interference, and conspiracy to commit extortion. We are going to freeze every single one of your offshore accounts. We are going to seize every asset you possess. We are going to bury this fraudulent company so deeply under litigation that the name Apex Freight will be nothing more than a cautionary tale taught in business schools." The ballroom erupted into sheer chaos. The investors were frantically dialing their own attorneys. Patricia was sitting on the stairs of the stage, weeping into her hands, completely ignored by the crowd that had adored her an hour ago. Jason backed away from the podium. His breathing was shallow and rapid. He stared out at the hostile faces of the investors he had defrauded. He looked at the shredded pieces of the contracts scattered across the floor. He looked at his mother collapsed and sobbing on the stairs. He finally realized the absolute totality of his destruction. His company was dead. His freedom was entirely dependent on whether the federal authorities reached him before the angry venture capitalists did. His life as he knew it was completely over. Panic, raw and blinding, seized control of his mind. He could not face the crowd. He could not face the reporters who would undoubtedly be waiting in the hotel lobby. He needed to disappear. While David Sterling continued to address the furious investors, detailing the steps Titan Retail would take to assist the authorities, Jason slowly retreated into the deep shadows at the rear of the stage. He slipped behind the heavy black velvet acoustic curtains that draped the back wall. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. If he could just reach the service corridor, he could bypass the main lobby. He could slip down the freight elevator exit through the hotel loading dock and disappear into the freezing Chicago night before the police arrived. He moved quickly, his expensive leather shoes making no sound against the thick carpeting behind the stage. He navigated through the dark, narrow pathway filled with thick audio-visual cables and heavy lighting rigs. Up ahead, bathed in the dull red glow of a solitary emergency exit sign, were the heavy double metal doors leading to the rear service hallway. Freedom. It was right there. He just needed to get through those doors. Jason broke into a desperate sprint. He reached the exit, throwing his entire body weight forward, his hands slamming hard against the metal crash bar of the service doors. The doors did not open. They did not even budge. Jason gasped, stepping back. He slammed his hands against the crash bar again, pushing with all his remaining strength. The metal groaned slightly, but the doors remained completely locked. He let out a pathetic, panicked sob, gripping the handle and pulling frantically. "Going somewhere, Jason?" The voice came from the shadows directly to his left. Jason froze, the blood turning to ice in his veins. Two men stepped out from the darkness, completely blocking his path back to the stage. They wore immaculate dark suits and moved with the synchronized, lethal grace of federal operatives. One of the men was Vance, the senior financial investigator Monica had brought to the gala. The other man was a towering, broad-shouldered operative who looked like he had spent his entire life breaking people precisely in half. Vance reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a heavy pair of steel handcuffs. They gleamed under the dull red light of the exit sign. "The service elevators are currently out of order," Vance said calmly, stepping forward to completely block the exit doors. "And I am afraid your launch party is not quite over yet. The authorities are waiting for you in the main lobby, and they are incredibly eager to hear more about your innovative business model." The towering operative standing next to Vance did not smile. He reached inside the breast pocket of his tailored jacket and pulled out a small, flat leather wallet. He flipped it open with a flick of his wrist, revealing a gleaming gold shield. "Federal Bureau of Investigation." The operative stated, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that left absolutely no room for negotiation. "Financial Crimes Division, Jason Blackwood. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, corporate espionage, and interstate embezzlement." Jason opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The slick, confident tech founder who had commanded the stage just moments ago was entirely gone, replaced by a trembling, terrified man facing the absolute ruin of his life. He took a weak, stumbling step backward, hitting the locked metal service doors. "Put your hands behind your back," Vance instructed, his tone brisk and professional. When Jason was too paralyzed by fear to comply, the towering FBI agent stepped forward, grabbed Jason by the shoulders of his expensive midnight blue suit, and spun him around. The cold steel of the handcuffs clicked shut around Jason's wrists with a sharp metallic finality. They did not drag him out through the service corridor. They marched him directly back the way he had come, out of the shadows and straight into the blinding glare of the grand ballroom. As Jason was paraded past the velvet curtains and back into full view of the crowd, a collective murmur of shock rippled through the hundreds of elite executives. The venture capitalists who had just watched their investments evaporate now stared in grim silence as the self-proclaimed king of Chicago logistics was led away like a common criminal. Down on the main floor, the chaos surrounding Patricia was reaching its absolute peak. She was still sitting on the carpeted steps leading up to the stage, her $10,000 silver designer gown pooling around her in a shimmering, wrinkled mess. She was desperately clutching the arm of a prominent freight broker, pleading with him to listen to her fabricated version of events. But the man pulled his arm away in disgust and quickly stepped back into the crowd. Patricia looked up, her tear-streaked face twisting into a mask of pure horror as she saw her son being marched across the stage in handcuffs. "Jason," she screamed, her voice cracking as she scrambled to her feet. "What are you doing to him? Unhand my son immediately. Do you have any idea who we are?" "You are Patricia Blackwood," a woman's voice answered firmly from the center aisle. Patricia spun around. 3 more federal agents in dark suits were marching purposefully down the center of the ballroom, parting the crowd of wealthy investors like the Red Sea. The lead agent, a tall woman with her hair pulled back into a severe bun, held a thick stack of folded warrants in her left hand. "Patricia Blackwood, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, and grand larceny," the lead agent announced, her voice carrying clearly over the dead silence of the room. "We have secured federal warrants to seize all assets connected to Apex Freight, including the offshore accounts registered under your name in the Cayman Islands." "No," Patricia shrieked, backing away until she hit the edge of the stage. "This is a misunderstanding. Monica set us up. She is crazy. You cannot arrest me in front of these people. I am hosting a gala." The lead agent did not flinch. She stepped forward, grabbed Patricia's wrists, and expertly secured the heavy steel cuffs. Patricia thrashed wildly, her expensive silver gown snagging on the sharp corner of a nearby cocktail table and tearing with a loud rip. The elegant high society matriarch, who had spent the entire evening looking down her nose at the logistics industry, was now publicly sobbing, her carefully styled hair falling into her face as she was physically restrained by federal authorities. While the main spectacle unfolded at the front of the ballroom, a quieter, equally desperate scene was taking place near the grand entrance. Amanda Jason's sister and the willing accomplice who had physically downloaded the corrupted files had seen the FBI agents enter the room. Panic had instantly consumed her. She knew her digital fingerprints were all over the stolen network architecture. She knew Monica had the security footage. Amanda abandoned her half-empty glass of champagne on a passing waiter's tray and quietly slipped toward the rear of the room. She kicked off her uncomfortable designer heels, leaving them abandoned on the plush carpet, and sprinted silently toward the coat check. She needed to get out before anyone noticed she was missing. She shoved her way past a bewildered attendant and grabbed her oversized designer tote bag off the rack. She did not make it past the velvet ropes of the main lobby. Two hotel security guards, accompanied by a sharp-eyed federal agent, stepped directly into her path. Amanda gasped, clutching the heavy tote bag tightly to her chest and trying to pivot toward the revolving glass doors. "Going somewhere?" Amanda, the federal agent, asked, stepping sideways to block her escape route. "I am just leaving," Amanda stammered, her eyes darting frantically toward the exit. "I do not have anything to do with what is happening in there. I am just a guest." The agent reached out and firmly took hold of the designer bag. Amanda tried to pull it back, but she was trembling too violently to maintain her grip. The agent unzipped the main compartment and tipped the bag forward. A cascade of heavy encrypted external hard drives and silver USB flash drives clattered loudly onto the polished marble floor of the lobby. They were the exact physical drives Amanda had used to extract the stolen client databases from Richard Logistics. She had brought them to the gala planning to hand them over to Jason's new development team immediately after the contract signing. She was caught absolutely red-handed. Amanda collapsed to her knees on the cold marble, burying her face in her hands and sobbing hysterically as the federal agent read her rights and pulled out a third pair of handcuffs. Back inside the grand ballroom, the federal agents were coordinating the extraction. They grouped Jason and Patricia together, flanking them tightly as they began the long, humiliating march down the center aisle toward the main exit. The crowd of investors, competitors, and former clients parted silently, watching the disgraced founders take their final walk. I stepped down from the stage and walked slowly toward the back of the room, keeping pace with the procession. I wanted to witness every single second of their downfall. I wanted to etch the look of absolute defeat on their faces into my memory forever. As the agents marched them past the massive melting ice sculptures at the rear of the ballroom, Patricia suddenly stopped dead in her tracks. Her eyes widened, locking onto a figure standing quietly near the main exit doors. It was my father. Richard had arrived quietly through the side doors just as the FBI began their raid. He wore a simple, impeccably tailored dark suit. He stood with his hands clasped firmly behind his back, his expression radiating a quiet, unshakable strength. He did not look like the broken, terrified man who had paced across my apartment living room just a few days prior. He looked like the titan of industry he truly was. He had watched the entire unmasking, and he was now watching the people who had exploited his guilt being led away in chains. Patricia's face twisted into a mask of desperate, frantic hope. She genuinely believed she could manipulate him one last time. She thought the decades of emotional leverage she had held over him would somehow override the massive corporate theft she had just been arrested for. Patricia screamed, her voice echoing shrilly across the quiet lobby as she strained against the grip of the federal agents. "Richard, thank God you are here. You have to help us." My father did not move. He simply stared at her, his face completely devoid of emotion. "They are making a terrible mistake," Patricia pleaded, tears streaming down her ruined makeup. "You know me? You know Jason. We would never do this to your company. Monica is framing us because her marriage failed. Please, Richard, you have to call your corporate lawyers. You have to post our bail. We are family. You cannot just let them take us away. You have to protect your family." The federal agents tugged on her arms, urging her forward, but Patricia dug her torn silver heels into the carpet, refusing to break eye contact with my father. She was banking everything on his misplaced sense of loyalty. She expected him to crumble, She expected him to rush forward, pull out his checkbook, and save them from the consequences of their own spectacular greed. Richard unclasped his hands. He took one slow, deliberate step forward. The entire ballroom seemed to hold its collective breath, waiting to see if the legendary founder of Richard Logistics would actually bail out the people who had tried to destroy his legacy. He looked at Jason, who was staring at the floor in absolute shattered silence. Then he looked Patricia dead in the eye. All the manufactured guilt, all the psychological manipulation she had subjected him to over the years had completely vanished. "You are not my family," Patricia Richard said. His voice was not loud, but it possessed a heavy, resonant, absolute finality that cut through the air like a physical blade. "You are a parasite. You tried to use my daughter's heart to steal my life's work." Patricia gasped, her mouth falling open in shock. "But how are we supposed to get home?" she wailed, her delusion fully taking over as the agents forcefully pulled her toward the revolving doors. "Our cars are impounded. We have nothing. What are we supposed to do?" Richard adjusted his jacket lapels, his expression shifting into a look of absolute icy indifference. "Try calling an Uber," Richard replied smoothly. The federal agents pushed the heavy glass doors open, dragging Patricia and Jason out into the freezing Chicago night, the flashing red and blue lights of the waiting police cruisers washing over their terrified faces. I stood next to my father, watching the police cars pull away from the curb. The silence in the lobby was profound. Richard turned to me, a small, incredibly proud smile touching the corners of his mouth. "Are we ready to go back to work, Monica?" he asked quietly. I nodded, slipping my arm through his. "Always." Behind us, the heavy brass doors of the grand ballroom swung open. David Sterling stepped out, holding a fresh glass of vintage champagne. He looked at the empty space where Jason and Patricia had just stood, then raised his glass toward us in a silent, respectful toast. "Ladies and gentlemen." David's voice boomed back into the ballroom, shattering the lingering tension. "The bar is officially open, and all drinks are on Titan Retail. Let us celebrate the future of Richard Logistics." The crowd erupted into a massive, deafening cheer, and I finally allowed myself to smile. The apex predators had been completely eliminated, and the real queens of the industry were officially back on the throne. The morning after the gala, the financial district of Chicago was buzzing with the spectacular implosion of Apex Freight. The dramatic arrests in the grand ballroom of the Drake Hotel had successfully neutralized Jason, Patricia, and Amanda, securing the physical evidence and permanently halting the immediate threat to Richard Logistics. However, simply stopping the core trio from stealing my company was never my ultimate goal. I wanted to ensure that the entire parasitic ecosystem that had enabled, encouraged, and benefited from their behavior was completely eradicated. I wanted to pull the rod out by the roots. That required a different kind of weapon, one far more terrifying than a corporate lawsuit. It required the Internal Revenue Service. During my exhaustive forensic audit of Jason's embezzlement scheme, I had not just found the offshore shell companies. I had identified the exact names attached to the 19 ghost employees he had inserted into our payroll system. Jason had not created fictional people to siphon funds. He had used the social security numbers of his own extended family. The very same aunts, uncles, and cousins who had spent years looking down on me, mocking my dedication to the family business and loudly praising Jason as a financial genius, had been happily cashing stolen corporate checks. They had accepted thousands of dollars a month in fraudulent income, treating my father's logistics company like their own personal endless slush fund. Crucially, because this money was stolen and routed through dummy corporations, not a single member of the extended family had ever declared a dime of that income on their federal tax returns. I compiled every fraudulent W-2, every cleared check, every offshore wire transfer, and every digital receipt connecting the ghost payroll to the extended Blackwood family. I bound them into a single, undeniable, extensively cross-referenced portfolio and handed it directly to a senior investigator at the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. I did not ask for corporate leniency or a quiet settlement. I asked for a full, unsparing, scorched earth audit of the entire extended family tree. The federal hammer dropped with terrifying speed and absolute unforgiving precision. Within 2 weeks of the gala, the IRS froze the bank accounts of 19 separate households across the affluent Chicago suburbs. The brutal real-world consequences were instantaneous. The extended family members had lived wildly beyond their legitimate means, floating on a massive bubble of stolen cash to maintain their country club lifestyles. Without those monthly ghost checks and with their legitimate assets completely locked down by federal auditors pending investigation, their luxurious worlds imploded overnight. I received the updates through Vance, who kept a close professional eye on the financial shockwaves ripping through the suburbs. Aunt Susan, who had once loudly advised Patricia at a holiday dinner that Jason needed a wife with a better social pedigree, had her sprawling 6-bedroom McMansion placed in immediate foreclosure when she defaulted on her heavily leveraged mortgage. The bank chained her front doors shut. Uncle Robert, who had happily mocked my father's traditional business model at Thanksgiving, walked out of his exclusive golf club one afternoon to find a repo agent winching his pristine custom-ordered Porsche Panamera onto the back of a flatbed tow truck. The designer wardrobes, the private university tuitions, the extravagant winter ski vacations to Aspen, and the lavish summer trips to the Hamptons all vanished in the blink of an eye. They were replaced by the crushing, terrifying reality of federal tax evasion charges. The extended family was not just broke. They were legally liable for years of unpaid federal taxes, massive compounding financial penalties, and potential prison sentences for willingly participating in a criminal conspiracy to defraud a corporation. The sudden realization that they were facing absolute ruin stripped away their refined high society facades in an instant, revealing the greedy, panicked cowards underneath. The unified front, the family had always maintained the impenetrable wall of arrogance they used to shut me out and elevate themselves, shattered into a million jagged pieces. There was no loyalty left among them. There was only a desperate clawing instinct for basic survival. The family group chats, once filled with photos of luxury vacations and smug, condescending complaints about my work ethic, devolved into a vicious circular firing squad. Cousins turned on each other, rushing to the United States Attorney's Office to secure plea deals before anyone else could grab the best terms of immunity. Aunt Susan actively volunteered to testify against Uncle Robert, providing federal prosecutors with printed emails proving he knew the monthly checks were the product of corporate theft. They handed over personal hard drives, financial statements, and years of text messages, desperate to avoid maximum mandatory minimum sentences. Every single one of them sang to the authorities. They eagerly threw Jason, Patricia, and Amanda under the bus, fighting bitterly over who could provide the most damaging concrete evidence to the federal investigators. The toxic loyalty that had bound them together was entirely transactional, and the exact moment the stolen money stopped flowing, they tore each other apart with the ferocity of starving animals. While the extended family destroyed themselves out in the suburbs, Jason was experiencing his own private, inescapable hell inside a federal holding cell. His polished, slick corporate arrogance had completely evaporated. The custom-tailored midnight blue suits were gone, replaced by standard-issue ill-fitting orange jumpsuits. He was facing multiple federal felony charges for wire fraud, corporate espionage, and massive interstate embezzlement. The charges carried a mandatory minimum sentence that would easily span decades. He was terrified, cornered, and entirely stripped of his perceived power. His expensive defense attorneys sat him down in a cold concrete visitation room and told him the unvarnished truth. The physical evidence Monica provided, combined with the eager cooperation of his entire extended family, made a conviction an absolute certainty. There was no clever legal loophole. There was no brilliant courtroom maneuver that would set him free. His only chance at reducing his sentence from decades to years was to offer the federal prosecutors a significantly bigger target. Jason, true to his fundamentally cowardly nature, did exactly what he had always done when faced with the consequences of his own actions. He looked for someone else to carry the blame. He decided to sacrifice the one person who had enabled his monstrous ego his entire life. He called an emergency meeting with the federal prosecutors and offered a full, unredacted confession. But the confession came with a specific calculated twist. Jason claimed that he was merely a pawn in a much larger game. He told the FBI that the entire embezzlement scheme, the creation of the ghost payroll, the routing of the offshore shell companies, and the corporate espionage against Richard Logistics had all been exclusively masterminded by his mother. He painted Patricia as a manipulative, greedy criminal mastermind who had mercilessly coerced him into stealing from my family to fund her extravagant high society lifestyle. He formally offered to testify against his own mother in open federal court in exchange for a drastically reduced sentence. Jason thought he was being incredibly clever. He thought he could sacrifice Patricia to save himself, assuming she would simply take the fall out of maternal duty. He assumed her love for him would override her instinct for self-preservation. He drastically underestimated the sheer, terrifying depth of Patricia's narcissistic rage. Federal prosecutors are legally required to disclose witness lists and potential testimony during the discovery phase of a criminal trial. Within 48 hours of Jason signing his proffer agreement, Patricia's legal team received the full unredacted transcript of his confession. They brought the thick stack of papers to Patricia in her own federal holding facility. When Patricia read the transcript, the psychological break was absolute. When she saw the words on the page, when she realized that her golden boy, the flawless son she had idolized, protected, and enabled her entire life, was explicitly framing her for federal crimes to save his own skin, something inside her permanently snapped. The fragile, twisted, toxic bond between mother and son completely disintegrated, replaced by a cold, calculating desire for absolute mutual destruction. Patricia demanded an immediate meeting with the United States Attorney. She completely refused to speak to Jason or his legal team. She officially refused to authorize any joint defense strategy. She immediately cut off the remaining legal funds she controlled, leaving Jason completely reliant on an overworked public defender. She sat across a metal table from the federal prosecutors, her eyes burning with an absolute venomous hatred, and laid out exactly how Jason had personally coded the Trojan horse algorithm. She did not ask for a plea deal. She did not ask for immunity. She provided the federal agents with the hidden access keys to Jason's private encrypted servers, ensuring the FBI had total unrestricted access to every illegal transaction, every stolen piece of code, and every fraudulent wire transfer he had ever authorized. By trying to save himself at her expense, Jason had guaranteed his own destruction. Patricia's retaliatory confession cemented an airtight, unbeatable case for the prosecution. She ensured that neither of them would receive a plea deal, and she guaranteed that neither of them would see the outside of a prison cell for a very long time. They were both going to face maximum sentencing, locked away in federal prison, completely and utterly destroyed by their own toxic, inescapable betrayal. 6 months later, the deafening roar of massive diesel engines and the sharp rhythmic beeping of reversing forklifts formed the most beautiful symphony I had ever heard. I stood on the elevated steel catwalk that wrapped around the perimeter of the Richard Logistics Master Command Center. Below me, the primary distribution floor was a masterpiece of orchestrated high-velocity commerce. It was a stark, magnificent contrast to the suffocating silence of the federal holding facilities where Jason and Patricia were currently awaiting their final sentencing hearings. While their fraudulent empire had dissolved into a mountain of federal indictments, seized assets, and ruined social standing, my company was breathing, expanding, and thriving with a vibrant, unstoppable energy I had never witnessed before. The massive digital display boards suspended high above the warehouse floor no longer tracked the parasitic fabricated expenses of Jason's 19 ghost employees. The days of bleeding our operating budget dry to fund designer gowns, luxury car leases, and offshore shell accounts were permanently over. Instead, the glowing screens displayed real-time, legitimate, highly profitable metrics. We were routing hundreds of thousands of tons of freight across the country. Our new, genuine proprietary software, built from scratch by a team of rigorously vetted, brilliant developers I had personally hired, was operating flawlessly. The screen showed our dispatchers seamlessly tracking fleet fuel consumption, projecting dynamic weather routing, and calculating optimized delivery schedules without a single catastrophic glitch or hidden backdoor. Titan Retail had not only honored their 10-year exclusive contract following the explosive gala, but their absolute confidence in our operational transparency had triggered a massive tidal wave of new enterprise clients. David Sterling had personally recommended our firm to 3 other national retailers. Because of that sudden aggressive influx of capital and volume, we were currently in the process of acquiring 3 massive new regional distribution hubs in Detroit, Indianapolis, and Columbus, officially expanding the Richard Logistics footprint completely across the Midwest corridor. The financial recovery over the past 6 months had been staggering, exposing Jason's embezzlement and permanently severing the bleeding artery of the untaxed ghost payroll had instantly injected millions of dollars back into our operating budget. I did not funnel that recovered capital into hidden accounts, and I certainly did not use it to purchase flashy depreciating assets to impress high society snobs. I reinvested every single dollar back into the absolute lifeblood of the company. Within a week of the FBI raids, I had gathered my executive team and completely overhauled our entire compensation structure. We instituted an immediate sweeping 20% wage increase for every legitimate, hard-working employee on our roster, from the loading dock foreman and the logistics planners to the long-haul drivers and the overnight dispatchers. We drastically upgraded our health insurance benefits, overhauled the driver safety protocols with state-of-the-art equipment, and completely modernized the employee break facilities on the warehouse floor. I walked down the metal stairs from the catwalk, my steel-toed boots ringing out sharply against the graded steps. I stepped onto the polished concrete of the main staging floor, letting the vibrant, kinetic energy of the warehouse wash over me. I did not walk these aisles radiating the manufactured, arrogant superiority that Jason had always relied upon to mask his profound incompetence. I did not demand fear, and I did not expect blind, unquestioning subservience. I demanded excellence, and I rewarded it fiercely. As I moved through the active loading lanes verifying the morning shipment manifests, supervisors offered respectful nods. Drivers waved down from the elevated cabs of their idling rigs. Forklift operators paused to shout friendly morning greetings over the roar of the warehouse machinery. I knew their names. I knew their specific delivery routes. I knew the grueling physical demands of the work they performed every single day to keep this empire moving. The respect I received from the floor was not bought with slick corporate jargon or empty motivational promises. It was forged in the absolute certainty that I would relentlessly protect this company and fiercely defend everyone who genuinely worked to build it. My phone vibrated heavily in the pocket of my tailored blazer. It was a scheduled video call from my father. I stepped into a quiet, glass-walled staging office, closing the heavy acoustic door behind me to block out the warehouse noise, and answered the call. Richard's face filled the screen. He was sitting on the sun-drenched wooden deck of a beautiful, understated lake house in northern Michigan, wearing a faded fishing hat and a comfortable, well-worn flannel shirt. He looked incredibly healthy, and easily 10 years younger. The deep, heavy stress lines that had carved themselves into his face during the height of the embezzlement crisis, back when he believed his life's work was failing, had completely vanished. He looked entirely at peace. We talked for 20 minutes about the recent Midwest expansion metrics and the successful onboarding of the new Titan retail regional hubs. He listened intently, nodding with absolute unwavering pride as I walked him through the quarterly profit projections. He did not offer unsolicited advice, he did not second-guess my routing strategies, and he did not attempt to micromanage my executive decisions. My father had officially stepped down from his role as Chief Executive Officer 3 months prior, transferring total operational and legal control directly into my hands. He had handed me the keys to his empire, not simply because I was his daughter, but because I had proven, under the most brutal fire imaginable, that I possessed the ruthless steel spine required to protect it. He was finally enjoying a stress-free retirement, completely disconnected from the cutthroat corporate warfare he had waged for 40 years, trusting me implicitly to carry the shield. We ended the call and I leaned against the heavy glass of the office window, looking out over the sprawling, humming warehouse. I thought back to the woman I had been just 1 year ago. I thought about the suffocating, gaslighting reality of my marriage to Jason. I remembered the endless, exhausting daily effort of trying to shrink myself down to fit into the narrow, toxic expectations of his family. I remembered sitting quietly at Patricia's immaculate, pretentious dining room table, silently enduring their condescending remarks, swallowing their veiled insults, and desperately trying to earn the basic approval of people who viewed my existence as nothing more than a convenient, disposable bank account. They had mistaken my loyalty for weakness. They had assumed my quiet dedication to my family's legacy was a sign of profound naivety. They believed they could bleed my company dry, humiliate me publicly, steal my intellectual property, and discard me without consequence. They thought I would simply crumble into a puddle of tears and quietly fade into the background while they built a shiny new empire on my stolen foundation. They were profoundly, catastrophically wrong. I did not just survive the ultimate betrayal, I weaponized it. I took the absolute worst moment of my life, the crushing, humiliating realization that my entire marriage was a calculated financial extraction scheme, and I forged it into an unbreakable suit of armor. I used their own staggering arrogance, their insatiable greed, and their profound underestimation of my capabilities to completely dismantle their fraudulent lives. I ripped the parasitic rot out of my company with surgical precision, exposed their massive criminal conspiracy to the federal government, and stood back to watch as their toxic, superficial loyalty crumbled under the crushing weight of their own self-serving cowardice. The brutal trials of the past year had burned away every lingering ounce of self-doubt I possessed. I no longer needed external validation, and I certainly no longer craved the conditional approval of toxic people. I had executed a flawless counterstrike that not only saved Richard Logistics, but elevated it to a level of dominance my father had only dreamed of achieving. I stepped back out of the glass office and onto the warehouse floor. The morning shift was in full glorious swing. The massive bay doors rolled open at the far end of the facility, letting the bright, crisp morning sunlight spill across the polished concrete. A convoy of our heavy transport trucks, freshly painted with the modernized, sleek Richard Logistics logo, rolled out of the staging yard. They were heavily loaded, perfectly dispatched, and heading toward destinations across the entire country. I stood in the center of the roaring, organized chaos, completely autonomous and entirely free from the suffocating expectations of a toxic marriage. I had broken the heavy chains of a parasitic relationship and utterly crushed the people who had tried to steal my future. I had taken the incredible legacy my father built, defended it against total annihilation, and evolved it into an untouchable industry titan. I looked out over my thriving empire, a woman who had finally claimed her absolute worth, having redefined the meaning of family loyalty and power entirely on my own terms.